It is now time for the final session of the day. I'd like to welcome Gavin Dingwall, who is the Head of Policy and Communications at the Sentencing Academy, to the podium to deliver the closing remarks. Again, Gavin is a very important and distinguished individual whose details are in the pack, so I don't want to run any more behind time, so thank you, Gavin.
If I'm very important and distinguished, don't worry, give me the full introduction. Very, very happy. Okay, thank you, Jay, for inviting me today. Thank you for inviting me to speak. And thanks a bunch for getting me to do the final comments. It's always tricky to know how to sort of wrap up an event, how to try and find themes which link what's about 8-9 papers on 3 different topics. So I'm going to keep my comments brief, and I'm going to just sort of talk really to 2 themes. The first thing I just want to sort of talk about is, I suppose, research and policy transfer. I've told a lie, there's 3 themes. You never ever do even numbers. The second theme I'm going to talk to is research and politics, Canva down. And the final one I'm going to talk about briefly is, who are we talking to when we're talking about sentencing and when we're talking about sentencing research? This is something which has come up a few times today, and I would just like to maybe just unpick that a little bit. So, the first thing, this point about policy transfer and sentencing. A number of issues which are quite clearly issues for Scottish sentencers are equally very, very difficult issues for sentencing in every other jurisdiction. Now, this is no great surprise. Take any area of law, and what you find, for example, say in criminal law, you find huge debates about, say, intention or the parameters of self-defence. Well, so it is in sentencing. And I think that suggests a couple of things. What that suggests is there's no easy answer, because if there is, we'd probably just be copying each other, we'd all go home happily. And I think the other thing is, it's healthy to have a debate. Some of these are issues which we might think there's a very straightforward answer to. Cases, I think, on sentencing have a great habit of actually just stating very, very bold principles without sort of articulating principle. Guidelines can also have this effect, and I know there's people here on guideline councils. Please don't take this as a criticism, because guidelines have to serve a function. They've got to sort of lay down principles for people who are doing sentencing. And, I mean, it was a point you made just there. I've never sentenced anybody in my life. I've had the luxury of spending 30 years standing in front of different audiences, criticising people who sentence people every day of their lives. But I think we've got to be careful. Just because something is presented in very clear tones, it can mask really complicated normative and policy choices. So, I mean, just a few things which I think are worth saying about the Scottish Sentencing Council. The first is, I applaud your bravery. You have gone right for some very, very difficult issues. Sentencing young people, okay? That now involves sort of considering some cutting-edge research about developmental psychology. It challenges views people have had for a long time. And let's be honest, politically it can also be very contentious. So it's important we don't dodge some of these difficult issues. And I think you're also right in that you are giving due attention to these issues. Because I think sometimes there's almost a temptation of getting, if you like, the low-hanging fruit, or whatever the sentencing equivalent is. and looking at offences within themselves. I like the fact that what you are doing is looking at generic sentencing principles. I think that's really important in setting out a general framework. One of the things which I think is quite incredible, if you look at the Sentencing Council in England and Wales, and you look at the sheer number of guidelines now in existence, bearing in mind when they started, it's an incredible enterprise, really. But I think looking at these key principles, trying to nail them down first, is a very sensible approach. And I think the other thing here is, as we have more work done by different sentencing councils, so we build up a base of evidence which can be very, very beneficial to all of us. So I think it's important to recognise that we are in a position now where we can learn off each other simply as we amass more and more research. The last time I spoke in this city, in the other place, was in 2019, and it was all your fault. I gave a lecture, and it was entitled, "Unlocking the Prison Crisis, Does Scotland Hold the Key for England and Wales?" And I'll tell you, I hope you came up with that naff title, not me. But this probably just gives quite a good indication. You can probably now guess what I talked about. I was talking about presumptions against short custodial sentences. It was being sort of discussed when Rory Stewart was prison minister back then, and then it sort of went away. Well, guess what? We've got a whole load of criminal justice legislation in the King's Speech, and guess what's included within that? Well, in the sentencing bill, we're now talking about introducing a presumption in favour of a suspended sentence for custodial terms of 12 months or fewer. How will this pan out? We don't know. Has it got the potential to reduce the prison population? We don't know. But what we do have is Scottish research. Now, of course, we've got to be really careful that we don't just take that on face value as evidence of what will happen in England and Wales, and the picture's not entirely clear, but there is something to look at, and there is something which has been looked at by policymakers south of the border. Which leads me on, really, I suppose, to the second part I wanted to talk about, and this is the sort of politics of sentencing. One of the things I think when we talk about people's understanding of sentencing is sentencing is, and sentencing, in my opinion, actually should be complicated. Now, the reason why I say that is, for many people, if you think about most criminal cases, we almost teach, I think, in law schools the wrong way around. Actual issues of substantive criminal law are actually very rare in criminal courts. And I say that as someone who taught criminal law at universities for 30 years. Evidential issues are more common, but actually, they don't arise in most trials. Sentencing happens daily in every criminal court in the country. So I sometimes think it'd be quite interesting almost if we flipped it over and we got people right at the start of their careers to think about what we're trying to do. So, we asked people, as Cyrus was saying, about their knowledge of criminal justice. Well, is it any great surprise that people claim we don't have a great deal of knowledge of this? I mean, first of all, it is really complicated law. And I just sketched when I was coming up on the train. We had a big sentencing act in 2020 in England and Wales. The idea here effectively was to codify sentencing. It didn't do that, okay? There was loads of things it didn't cover. But 2023, we've got a King's Speech. There are 3 major bills in that, all of which cover sentencing. One of them, depending on your definition, is actually primarily about parole. I actually share your view, Cyrus. When people talk about sentencing, think about sentencing, they're thinking about release throughout that kind of discussion. There are also 3 other bills there which will impact on sentencing as well. So, at the same time, we've had new guidelines, we've had appellate judgments of significance. So we're actually trying here, if we go back to your duck, we're hitting a duck which is running damn fast, okay? We're trying here to deal with something, to talk to the public about something which is not static. And a slightly wider point here is that what we're also talking about is a legal system increasingly which sees criminalisation as a default position. If there is a new harm or something that's causing people anxiety, increasingly it just seems to be this gut instinct that our response should be criminal legislation. And we could debate the merits of that, that's a separate discussion. But as a conference talking about sentencing, there are implications to that. There are practical implications, how that will impact on probation service, prison service, etc. There are other ones as well. So, for example, do you have to revisit sentencing guidelines when that happens? There's a lot of things to unpack there. I think just to complicate it a little bit further, a lot of these new offences don't just criminalise behaviours, but they recriminalise behaviours. These things often deal with things which are offences anyway. Okay? An example I often give, do you remember the acid attacks in London? That's already covered by grievous bodily harm. Guess what the maximum penalty for that is? Life imprisonment. Okay? So this was a symbolic offence. It was a debate, really, about nothing. Okay? But I think debates about punishment have to feed into debates about criminalisation. And the final point I'm going to just talk about very, very briefly, you'll be pleased to know, my friend, is the issue about who we're talking to. Because I think this also matters, because I think there's a sort of wider question here. Because one of the functions of the Scottish Sentencing Council and the Sentencing Council in England and Wales, and the organisation which I represent, is this public educative function. Universities always now prize this idea of knowledge exchange activity as well. So this is central to what is seen as our role. And you can have debates about different audiences, but there's a couple of points I just want to throw on. The first is organisations seem to think that digital platforms are where we should be putting information. Digital poverty is a massive issue. Okay? We need to start thinking imaginatively about other ways we can get information across. Okay? Now, I can't necessarily come up with any great solutions to that, but I think it's very tempting sometimes. My organisation has a lot of information online. I think we need to think beyond that if we're going to talk to different audiences. I also want to congratulate the Council because I think you are doing incredibly good work at disseminating to people of different age groups. I was struck, can't actually see, I don't know where you've gone. I was struck, for example, on LinkedIn with the work you're doing in secondary schools. There was a conference for people, I think, who are teaching modern studies, and the council went, spoke to teachers. That's brilliant. That's a really worthwhile endeavour. And I'm going to end with sort of discussion we had. A lot of us were at an event in Westminster a fortnight ago where the House of Commons Justice Select Committee sort of launched a report into public perceptions of sentencing. They said one of the important things is if the public are misinformed about sentencing, that leads often to very poor policy making and to poor law. And I think that's an interesting dynamic. I'm not wholly convinced by it, but I think it's an important thing to recognise that getting evidence out to the public in as best a way we can, to as many people as we can, could actually be of real significance. Thank you all very much indeed. We have a panel of people who will take questions. We are sort of overrunning. I am conscious about the time. People do have trains to catch. So about 10 minutes of questions, something like that, Jay, and then I'll invite Lord Matthews to say a few words.
Hey, thank you very much. Slightly earlier than I thought I was going to be here, but slightly later than I was normally in a lecture theatre in Glasgow on a Friday afternoon. It's time now, as you know, to bring this inaugural Scottish Sentencing Research Symposium to a close. I hope there's a lot of meaning in the word inaugural, because we want to see you back here, or if not here, then perhaps in Edinburgh. And it's very brave of all those from Edinburgh who came here through to Glasgow. They managed to speak without all the panelling on the walls falling over. I'm sure we've all taken something from today, in whatever field we practice. One of the main things I'll take is from the photographs which we saw up from those who were under supervision, particularly the one from the Botanic Gardens, because the next time my wife tells me in the morning I look like a half-shut knife, I'll tell her that I'm half open. It's been a most informative and stimulating discussion on the work of the Council, sentencing young people, sentencing mental health, particularly that's an interest of ours. We're hoping to develop something on that very soon. Community sentencing and rehabilitation. Can I extend my appreciation on behalf of the Council to all the chairs, the speakers at the symposium, not just from the table here and from this point, but from the floor. We've asked very pointed and interesting questions to enable the whole discussion to develop. Can I thank in particular my judicial and council colleagues from England, Wales and Northern Ireland for joining us today, and our co-hosts, the Sentencing Academy and the University of Glasgow, particularly Jay, for always help today with setting up and recording. This is an appropriate point as well to thank the Secretariat of our council. They waft around in the background like the proverbial swan, with the feet going like this underneath, keeping everything smooth for the rest of us. We wouldn't be anywhere near where we are today without their work, and I'm extremely grateful to them for that. Can I thank you all for coming today? It's great to, again, be in Glasgow in a lecture theatre without someone making a noise like a bomb dropping and then everybody stamps the floor. Don't you remember that from this place? Anyway, we've all forged, I hope, some new connections. We'll amplify this important work after the symposium, and as has been said, we'll prepare a short report for publication, take that away and consider other ideas. We've recorded the presentation, so links with that will be shared if anyone wants to look at them, and please circulate them as widely as you would like to. You've got a bit of time now to enjoy yourself. I hope you sample the delights of Glasgow. If you've got nothing else to do, you can ask yourselves why the coat of arms has a bird that never flew, a tree that never grew, a fish that never swam, and a bell rather, that never rang. I know the answer, but I'm not going to tell you. Look it up, ask somebody, or Google it. Up to you. That's now the symposium at a close. I wish you safe home. I wish also myself I can work this thing. It doesn't matter. I'm sure the last few words were just as exciting as what I've just said. So, thank you very much again. We'll see you hopefully in a year's time.